hello, and good evening. I am Sam, and you are listening to Literacy on this, the 6th night of Booksmas. My goodness, La Hump sneaking in there with the 23 months of subscription. Thank you very much. I hope you are well. It's lovely to see you here. As I was saying in chat, Joey has never once known contact with another being, and now is the time to make a change. Yes, right now. Booksmas, you like it? Thanks. I literally thought of it just then as I was forming the sentence. Maybe that's what we should call it next year. I don't know. Booksmas. Something. But yeah. Hello. Thank you. Welcome for being here. I, Sam, am reading books tonight, but first, introductions. Is you like weak? It's got an energy. I'm not gonna lie. My cat's have a sixth sense to know exactly how to be the most in the way possible. Yes, he does. Yes, you. I'm talking about you. Sorry, I was facing away from the microphone because that's where he is. But yeah, hello, welcome to this, the 6th night of... I'm going to Booksmas again. It just fits on the end of that sentence like nothing else will. Where I shall be reading you just but one William Hope Hodgson short story, The Hog, which I finished reading just earlier today, and I really enjoyed. I thought it was good. I feel like I would class it as a hit. It is another Carnacki story, so if you have been enjoying the adventures of his paranatural super sleuth, my words, not his, then stick around for that. And yeah, it's made me want to go on and read the Blackwood character. I think it's like John Silence. I say every time I think it's John Silence because I think that's what the name is. I've never bothered to actually look it up and memorize it. But yeah, I now want to go and read those as well because apparently those are what inspired this. And like, yeah, I'm enjoying these. They've been a great introduction to Hodgson's writing for me, and I enjoyed what I've read of Blackwood as well. So all kind of seems like good stuff, really. But before we get on to that, how are you all? Are you well? Really just dropped lots of nacho crumbs on your laptop. GG indeed. Oh no. RIP. I would say pour one out for the laptop, but at a respectful distance from the laptop so we don't do what I did. But yes, I hope that is nothing too bad and is recoverable in some easy form, because that would suck otherwise. Yeah, exactly, Andy. Pour one out for the laptop, but not near the laptop. In another part of the house, and down the sink. Go pour something expensive down the sink. Most of it landed on your laptop, got very little. Okay, good. That's, yeah. That sounds safe and recoverable. And yes, Lynn, you're not late at all. You're good. You're absolutely fine. I'll just sit here and talk for half an hour before we even get to the story. Don't you worry about that. No, Lama, you're at a mosque making small talk with half the neighbourhood and had to tear away and run home not to miss the stream. Oh, well, thank you. Hello, Andy Pants' cat. I'm assuming we'll get the name of said cat soon, but hello, welcome. If Twitch counted your view too, oh, happy days. But, we'll settle for the one. Hey, Salad, welcome. You're joining the craft corner today, painting your journal pages of the day. Lovely. Imhotep? Well then, hello and welcome, Imhotep. I hope that you too enjoy the stream. Oh, the one loaded nacho chip that had all the crumbs on it. Ah, yes, I know it well. Yeah, yep, yeah. But yeah, how are we? I asked that question about 20 times a stream, so might as well make a start on up in that count today. Are we all well? It is Saturday. What have I done today? I have read mostly. I have done a little bit of something else that I'm not going to say what it is for a couple of reasons. Lucy knows what it is. I don't know, maybe one day if it ever actually turns into anything, I'll be able to say, hey, that was the thing. But it's very unlikely. But, it just took a bit of time for something potentially fun and cool if it goes where I'd like it to. But we shall see. Lady Mephistopheles might either go back to being a zoo manager in your game or maybe play some Palia. Nice. Yeah, I've not been able to play much Palia today. I think I logged in earlier and did a couple of dailies. I've not got any more. I need to find some more pebbles now for, is it Einar, the fishing robot? Because, yeah, only being able to give one of those a day is like, great, well, okay, that sucks, but sure, I'll come back and do the next one the next day. And then the supply has dried up, so I'm not sure where to get the rest. So, I just show up and say, hello, and that's it. Andy Pants, you finished an epic run of Plate Up a little bit ago. I mean, it sounded from what I just saw you write on Dave's server, it was kind of ended for you by essentially a misclick. So I'm sorry for that loss. That sucks. But hey, yeah, we've all, it seems, got Palia to go back to when all else fails. So nice. Also, thank you, Lucy. I see that the thing was good. I'm glad. Been playing Minecraft and listening to Chilliteracy VODs. Hey, they sound cool. That's cool. Good. I'm glad that our stuff is where you choose to spend your time. I hope it's been entertaining. And yeah, sounds like a nice way to spend some time. Lama, you finished Stray Gods this morning. You accidentally broke up with your love interest, so you're sad. Oh no, that is sad. I'm sorry. It's been great. Nice. Well, I'm glad. That's the sort of positive feedback that we love to get around here. But I sound like I'm being sarcastic, but genuinely, thank you. It means a lot. Like, sincerely, knowing that whenever you do something like this, there is always this worry that people turn up out of a sense of obligation. Yes, even you, Kat. Just like pulling the curtain back to show some of the anxiety that probably a lot of streamers, most every streamer, has behind it. It's like you always worry that either no one's going to be there or that the ones that are there just kind of well, I guess. So truthfully, knowing that people actually seek out the stuff that we put up, you actually hello, okay, are going over to the VODs and things to catch up on stories because you enjoy it. When you there's other things you could be doing with your time, but you enjoy what we do. Genuinely, that's the best feedback we can get. It's really nice. So yeah, thank you. And saying this is not to put pressure on other people to go and do that. We want you to engage at whatever level you are happy with. Lynn, your recent Insomniac nights have been spent catching up on Dungeons and Dragons and evenings with live streams. Nice. Well, I mean, I'm sorry for the Insomniac nights, but I hope that has been good company for you on those nights. As someone who has also been through stretches where sleep has been one hell of a struggle, I empathise completely. I know that sucks, but yeah, I hope that has helped. Yeah. And yes, see you there, Andy Pants. Absolutely enjoyable for this week with the streams. Every day has been excellent. Yeah, I say me and Lucy are both sad to see it coming to an end as well. It for me has definitely given me it's confirmed the suspicion I had that we wouldn't be able to sustain this kind of pace on a regular basis, because it takes if it were a full-time thing, yes, but it takes a surprising amount of time to actually get ready for a stream, which, speaking of, we still need to get ready for tomorrow's one. But yeah, it's a surprising amount of work and energy goes into this. It takes time and preparation and voice. Yes, exactly. So yeah, it's a shame that we wouldn't be able to do this certainly at this level we are at as a full-time thing, every day. But it's nice to know that, yeah, we've actually been able to organise something like this, schedule it, put it together, plan it out, and so far, touch varnish on a wooden desk, execute on it. It's really nice, and certainly something that has given us a bit of a framework to build on for next year, and to sort of try and come back with something again next year, and sort of see where we can go and what we can do. But yeah, and from us, it's been absolutely lovely that people have been taken to it. Like you've all been here, turning out every night to come and see the stream, and it's nice again to know that if we stream it, people will be there to quote Field of Dreams. I think that line's in the film. Hello, no, this is my water, this is mine, you can't have it, because if nothing else, I don't think you could operate the spout at the top. Poorly, sometimes we listen to ones you've already heard because you tend to lose focus a lot. That's just me, and what I would be like with audiobooks in general. So, but hey, your loss of focus is our extra views on the play count, I guess. So, win-win. Thank you. Make hay while the sun's shining and all that. Lynn, your conditions can cause you to sleep 16 hours a day or 3 hours a day. Oof. Wow. Yeah. Neither of those sounds fun. I have to say. I imagine you'd agree. Seem to have gone into the no sleep phase. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you have things there for you that are sort of keeping you occupied through that. I hope. Yeah, I hope there is some sort of help or alleviation to it that's available. Anyway, I'm just sitting here whittering now. Been up for about 20 minutes on the stream, so maybe I should start a story, because we just have the one short story tonight. Operator, sometimes it's even more annoying when you lose focus over and over on the same spot on the VOD. You have to skip back several times. Brain, why? Firstly, I've had that with literal books in front of me. There's a few where literally I've had to read the same paragraph over and over again because I just slide off it, and I understand all the words that I have read, but when my brain tries to assemble them into some sort of order to discern a greater meaning from them, no, absolutely not. I've got to go back again. And yeah, plus, in a conversation I was having with Lucy just yesterday, I've observed a weird well, I don't know if it's weird, but just a habit, a behaviour in myself, where if for example I'm playing a game and I have a stream on the second screen, I'm fine just with that stream being there, making some background noise, filling out that sort of mental space that needs noise to fill it in. And that's okay, not concentrating on it, not taking it in, every now and then glancing over when someone does something loud and going, yeah, that was funny, and then getting on with my life. However, if I have put on a VOD, if I have sought out a video of something that were I watching it live would be treated the same way, I have to pause that thing if my concentration slips for a second. If I'm focusing on the game, I'm gonna have to pause the VOD. Or if I get up to excuse me, slipping on the desk. If I get up to go and make a drink, if I want to go downstairs for a few minutes to get a coffee or something, then I have to pause while I'm watching, because I can't just let it play on. And if I were watching this live, I wouldn't care. I would be absolutely fine, but because I've elected to put this thing on, it has to get my attention, and I shall not waste a second of it. And I don't know, it's an interesting thing to become aware of that you do. I don't know if that resonates with anyone else. Yeah. So what was the book about? Well, there were words in an order, and then it stopped. Then that's what it's like for you if you ever try to read a book. You know the words and can read them, but you can't process them to understand what they're describing. Yeah, that's fair. I'm going to assume for different reasons, but I have definitely myself had that experience with some things that I have read. and then other things I would just describe them as immensely readable, where it's just like I'm tuned in to the author's wavelength, and everything just flows, everything just like fits and falls into place, and I will just speed through it, because like it takes just no processing power to actually scrutinize what has been said. It's just like, cool, got it, on with the life. And it's such a vastly different experience when that happens. And then the book is done. You're like, oh, next. But yeah, I'm getting caught up talking, and yeah, we have, this is one story, which will be split across both parts of the stream, because it's reasonably long short story. And yeah, the first half, because I was expecting to do all this talking, will be a little bit shorter. But I'm hoping that I've not like badly mistimed it and will be dragging on for ages. But yes, without any real further ado, I shall begin, and hope that the headache that is trying to come up will just stay away. Maybe it'll do that. But yeah, if you've got your drink of any kind ready and your crafting ready to go, maybe, I mean, you'd probably start the crafting as soon as you felt like it. You do you. But yes, if you are ready, I am ready, and waiting for Joey to hop down and start distracting me to do other things. But we shall begin with The Hog by William Hope Hodgson. Part 1. We had finished dinner, and Karnacki had drawn his big chair up to the fire and started his pipe. Jessup, Arkwright, Taylor, and I had each of us taken up our favourite positions and waited for Karnacki to begin. I've just realised I forgot to find a text and link it. I don't know if anyone will be able to do that, but if you do, that would be super kind. I'm just going to carry on with the story. Thank you, Lucy. Much appreciated. I knew there was something I'd forgotten. And we waited for Karnacki to begin. What I'm going to tell you about happened in the next room, he said, after drawing at his pipe for a while. It has been a terrible experience. Dr. Whitten first brought the case to my notice. We'd been chatting over a pipe at the club one night about an article in the Lancet, and Whitten mentioned having just such a similar case in a man called Baines. I was interested at once. It was one of those cases of a gap or flaw in a man's protection barrier, I call it. A failure to be what I might term efficiently insulated, spiritually, from the outer monstrosities. From what I knew of Whitten, I knew he'd be no use. You all know Whitten. A decent sort, hard-headed, practical, stand-no-kind-of-nonsense sort of man, all right at his own job when that job's a fractured leg or a broken collarbone. But he'd never have made anything of Baines' case. For a space, Karnacki puffed meditatively at his pipe, and we waited for him to go on with his tale. I told Whitten to send Baines to me, he resumed, and the following Saturday he came up, a little sensitive man. I liked him as soon as I set eyes on him. After a bit, I got him to explain what was troubling him and question him about what Dr. Whitten had called his dreams. They're more than dreams, he said. They're so real that they're actual experiences to me. They're simply horrible, and yet there's nothing very definite in them to tell you about. They generally come just as I'm going off to sleep. I'm hardly over before suddenly I seem to have got down to some deep, vague place with some inexplicable and frightful horror all about me. I can never understand what it is, for I never see anything, only I always get a sudden knowledge, like a warning that I have got down into some terrible place, a sort of hell place, I might call it, where I've no business ever to have wandered. And the warning is always insistent, even imperative, that I must get out, or some enormous horror will come at me. Joey wishes to leave. 1 second. The cat distractions begin. Can't you pull yourself back? I asked him. Can't you wake up? No, he told me. That's just what I can't do, try as I will. I can't stop going along this labyrinth of hell, as I call it to myself, towards some dreadful unknown horror. The warning is repeated ever so strongly, almost as if the live me of my waking moments was awake and aware. Something seems to warn me to wake up, that whatever I do I must wake, and then my consciousness comes suddenly alive, and I know that my body is there in the bed, but my essence or spirit is still down there in that hell, wherever it is, in a danger that is both unknown and inexpressible, but so overwhelming that my whole spirit seems sick with terror. I keep saying to myself all the time that I must wake up, he continued, but it is as if my spirit is still down there, and as if my consciousness knows that some tremendous invisible power is fighting against me. I know that if I do not wake then, I shall never wake up again, but go down deeper and deeper into some stupendous horror of soul destruction. So then I fight. My body lies in the bed there and pulls, and the power down there in that labyrinth exerts itself too, so that a feeling of despair greater than any I have ever known on this earth comes to me. I know that if I give way and cease to fight, and do not wake, then I shall pass out to that monstrous horror which seems to be silently calling my soul to destruction. Then I make a final stupendous effort, he continued, and my brain seems to fill my body like the ghost of my soul. I can even open my eyes and see with my brain or consciousness out of my own eyes. I can see the bedclothes, and I know just how I am lying in the bed, yet the real me is down in that hell in terrible danger. Can you get me? He asked. Perfectly, I replied. Well, you know, he went on, I fight and fight. Down there in that great pit my very soul seems to shrink back from the call of some brooding horror that impels it silently a little further, always a little further round a visible corner, which, if I once pass, I know I shall never return again to this world. Desperately I fight, brain and consciousness fighting together to help it. The agony is so great that I could scream were it not that I am rigid and frozen in the bed with fear. Then, just when my strength seems almost gone, soul and body win and blend slowly, and I lie there worn out with this terrible, extraordinary fight. I have still a sense of a dreadful horror all about me, as if out of that horrible place some brooding monstrosity had followed me up, and hangs still and silent and invisible over me, threatening me there in my bed. Do I make it clear to you? He asked. It's like some monstrous presence. Yes, I said, I follow you. The man's forehead was actually covered with sweat, so keenly did he live again through the horrors he had experienced. After a while, he continued. Now comes the most curious part of the dream, or whatever it is, he said. There's always a sound I hear as I lie there exhausted in the bed. It comes while the bedroom is still full of the sort of atmosphere of monstrosity that seems to come up with me when I get out of the place. I hear the sound coming up out of that enormous depth, and it is always the noise of pigs. Pigs grunting, you know. It's just simply dreadful. The dream is always the same. Sometimes I've had it every single night for a week until I fight not to go to sleep. But of course I have to sleep sometimes. I think that's how a person might go mad, don't you? He finished. I nodded and looked at his sensitive face. Poor beggar, he had been through it, no mistake. Tell me some more, I said. The grunting, what does it sound like exactly? It's just like pigs grunting, he told me again, only much more awful. There are grunts and squeals and pig howls like you hear when their food is being brought to them at a pig farm. You know those large pig farms where they keep hundreds of pigs? All the grunts, squeals and howls blend into one brutal chaos of sound. Only it isn't chaos, it all blends in a queer, horrible way. I've heard it, a sort of swinish, clamouring melody that grunts and roars and shrieks in chunks of grunting sounds, all tied together with squealings and shot through with pig howls. I've sometimes thought there was a definite beat in it, for every now and again there comes a gargantuan grunt breaking through the million pig-voiced roaring, a stupendous grunt that comes in with a beat. Can you understand me? It seems to shake everything. It's like a spiritual earthquake. The howling, squealing, grunting, rolling clamour of swinish noise coming up out of that place, and then a monstrous grunt rising through it all, an ever-recurring beat out of the depth. The voice of the swine mother of monstrosity beating up from below through that chorus of mad swine hunger. It's no use, I can't explain it. No one ever could. It's just terrible. And I'm afraid you're saying to yourself that I'm in a bad way, that I want a change or a tonic, that I must buck up or I'll land myself in a madhouse. If only you could understand. Dr. Whitten seems to half understand, I thought, but I know he's only sent me to you as a sort of last hope. He thinks I'm booked for the asylum. I could tell it. Nonsense, I said. Don't talk such rubbish. You're as sane as I am. Your ability to think clearly what you want to tell me, and then to transmit it to me so well that you compel my mental retina to see something of what you have seen, stands sponsor for your mental balance. I'm going to investigate your case, and if it is what I suspect, one of those rare instances of a flaw or gap in your protective barrier, what I might call your spiritual insulation from the outer monstrosities, I've no doubt we can end the trouble. But we've got to go properly into the matter first, and there will certainly be danger in doing so. I'll risk it, replied Baines. I can't go on like this any longer. Very well, I told him. Go out now and come back at 5 o'clock. I shall be ready for you then, and don't worry about your sanity. You're all right, and we'll soon make things safe for you again. Just keep cheerful and don't brood about it. Part 2. I put in the whole afternoon preparing my experimenting room across the landing there for his case. When he returned at 5 o'clock, I was ready for him and took him straight into the room. It gets dark now about 6:30, as you know, and I had just enough time before it grew dusk to finish my arrangements. I prefer always to be ready before the dark comes. Baines touched my elbow as we walked into the room. "There's something I ought to have told you," he said, looking rather sheepish. "I've somehow felt a bit ashamed of it." "Out with it," I replied. He hesitated a moment, then it came out with a jerk. "I told you about the grunting of the pigs," he said. "Well, I grunt too. I know it's horrible. When I lie there in bed and hear those sounds after I've come up, I just grunt back, as if in reply. I can't stop myself, I just do it. Something makes me. I never told Dr. Whitten that. I couldn't. I'm sure now you think me mad," he concluded. He looked into my face, anxious and queerly ashamed. "It's only the natural sequence of the abnormal events, and I'm glad you told me," I said, slapping him on the back. "It follows, logically on, what you had already told me. I have had 2 cases that in some way resembled yours." "What happened?" he asked me. "Did they get better?" "One of them is alive and well today, Mr. Baines," I replied. "The other man lost his nerve, and, fortunately for all concerned, he is dead." I shut the door and locked it as I spoke, and Baines stared round, rather alarmed, I fancy, at my apparatus. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Will it be a dangerous experiment?" "Dangerous enough," I answered, "if you fail to follow my instructions absolutely in everything. We both run the risk of never leaving this room alive. Have I your word that I can depend on you to obey me whatever happens?" He stared round the room and then back at me. "Yes," he replied, and you know I felt he would prove the right kind of stuff when the moment came. I began now to get things finally in train for the night's work. I told Baines to take off his coat and his boots. Then I dressed him entirely from head to foot in a single thick rubber combination overall, with rubber gloves and a helmet with ear flaps of the same material attached. I dressed myself in a similar suit. Then I began on the next stage of the night's preparations. Excuse me again. Cool. First, I must tell you that the room measures 39 feet by 37 and has a plain board floor over which is fitted a heavy half-inch rubber covering. I had cleared the floor entirely, all but the exact centre where I had placed a glass-legged, upholstered table, a pile of vacuum tubes and batteries, and 3 pieces of special apparatus which my experiment required. "Now, Baines," I called, "come and stand over here by this table. Don't move about. I've got to erect a protective barrier round us, and on no account must either of us cross over it by even so much as a hand or foot once it is built." We went over to the middle of the room, and he stood by the glass-legged table while I began to fit the vacuum tubing together round us. I intended to use a new spectrum defence, which I have been perfecting lately. This, I must tell you, consists of 7 glass vacuum circles with the red on the outside and the colour circles lying inside it, in the order of orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The room was still fairly light, but a slight quantity of dusk seemed to be already in the atmosphere, and I worked quickly. Suddenly, as I fitted the glass tubes together, I was aware of some vague sense of nerve strain, and glancing round at Baines, who was standing there by the table, I noticed him staring fixedly before him. He looked absolutely drowned in uncomfortable memories. "For goodness sake, stop thinking of those horrors," I called out to him. "I shall want you to think hard enough about them later, but in this specially constructed room it is better not to dwell on things of that kind till the barriers are up. Keep your mind on anything normal or superficial. The theatre will do. Think about that last piece you saw at the Gaiety. I'll talk to you in a moment." 20 minutes later the barrier was completed all around us, and I connected up the batteries. The room by this time was greying with the coming dusk, and the 7 differently coloured circles shone out with extraordinary effect, sending out a cold glare. "By Jove!" cried Baines. "That's very wonderful. Very wonderful." My other apparatus, which I now began to arrange, consisted of a specially made camera, a modified form of phonograph with earpieces instead of a horn, and a glass disc composed of many fathoms of glass vacuum tubes arranged in a special way. It had 2 wires leading to an electrode constructed to fit around the head. By the time I had looked over and fixed up these 3 things, night had practically come, and the darkened room shone most strangely in the curious upward glare of the 7 vacuum tubes. "Now, Baines," I said, "I want you to lie on this table. Now put your hands down by your sides and lie quiet and think. You've just got 2 things to do," I told him. "One is to lie there and concentrate your thoughts on the details of the dream you are always having, and the other is not to move off this table whatever you see or hear, or whatever happens, unless I tell you. You understand, don't you?" "Yes," he answered. "I think you may rely on me not to make a fool of myself. I feel curiously safe with you somehow." "I'm glad of that," I replied, "but I don't want you to minimize the possible danger too much. There may be horrible danger. Now, just let me fix this band on your head," I added, as I adjusted the electrode. I gave him a few more instructions, telling him to concentrate his thoughts particularly upon the noises he heard just as he was waking, and I warned him again not to let himself fall asleep. "Don't talk," I said, "and don't take any notice of me. If you find I disturb your concentration, keep your eyes closed." He lay back, and I walked over to the glass disc, arranging the camera in front of it, on its stand, in such a way that the lens was opposite the centre of the disc. I had scarcely done this when a ripple of greenish light ran across the vacuum tubes of the disc. This vanished, and for maybe a minute there was complete darkness. Then the green light rippled once more across it, rippled and swung round and began to dance in varying shades from a deep heavy green to a rank ugly shade, back and forward, back and forward. Every half-second or so there shot across the varying greens a flicker of yellow, an ugly, heavy, repulsive yellow, and then abruptly there came sweeping across the disc a great beat of muddy red. This died as quickly as it came, and gave place to the changing greens shot through by the unpleasant and ugly yellow hues. About every 7th second the disc was submerged, and the other colours momentarily blotted out by the great beat of heavy, muddy red which swept over everything. "He's concentrating on those sounds," I said to myself, and I felt queerly excited as I hurried on with my operations. I threw a word over my shoulder to Baines. "Don't get scared, whatever happens," I said. "You're all right." I proceeded now to operate my camera. It had a long roll of specially prepared paper ribbon in place of a film or plates. By turning the handle, the roll passed through the machine, exposing the ribbon. It took about 5 minutes to finish the roll, and during all that time the green lights predominated, but the dull, heavy beat of muddy red never ceased to flow across the vacuum tubes of the disc at every 7th second. It was like a recurrent beat in some unheard and somehow displeasing melody. Lifting the exposed spool of paper ribbon out of the camera, I laid it horizontally in the 2 rests that I had arranged for it on my modified gramophone. Where the paper had been acted upon by the varying coloured lights which had appeared on the disc, the prepared surface had risen in curious, irregular little waves. I unrolled about a foot of the ribbon and attached the loose end to an empty spool roller on the opposite side of the machine, which I had geared to the driving clockwork mechanism of the gramophone. Then I took the diaphragm and lowered it gently into place above the ribbon. Instead of the usual needle, the diaphragm was fitted with a beautifully made metal filament brush about 1 inch broad, which just covered the whole breadth of the ribbon. This fine and fragile brush rested lightly on the prepared surface of the paper, and when I started the machine the ribbon began to pass under the brush, and as it passed, the delicate metal filament bristles followed every minute inequality of those tiny, irregular wave-like excrescences on the surface. I put the earpieces to my ears, and instantly I knew that I had succeeded in actually recording what Baines had heard in his sleep. In fact, I was even then hearing mentally by means of his effort of memory. I was listening to what appeared to be the faint, far-off squealing and grunting of countless swine. It was extraordinary, and at the same time exquisitely horrible and vile. It frightened me, with a sense of my having come suddenly and unexpectedly too near to something foul and most abominably dangerous. So strong and imperative was this feeling that I twitched the earpieces out of my ears and sat a while staring round the room, trying to steady my sensations back to normality. The room looked strange and vague in the dull glow of light from the circles, and I had a feeling that a taint of monstrosity was all about me in the air. I remembered what Baines had told me of the feeling he'd always had after coming up out of that place, as if some horrible atmosphere had followed him up and filled his bedroom. I understood him perfectly now, so much so that I had mentally used almost his exact phrase in explaining to myself what I felt. Turning round to speak to him, I saw there was something curious about the centre of the defence. Now, before I tell you fellows any more, I must explain that there are certain what I call focusing qualities about this new defence I've been trying. The Sigsand manuscript puts it something like this: "Avoid diversities of colour, nor stand ye within the barrier of the colour lights. For in colour hath Satan a delight, nor can he abide in the deep if ye adventure against him armed with red-purple. So be warned, neither forget that in blue, which is God's colour in the heavens, ye have safety. You see, from that statement in the Sixth manuscript, I got my first notion for this new defence of mine. I have aimed to make it a defence, and yet have focusing or drawing qualities such as the Sixth hints at. I have experimented enormously, and I've proved that reds and purples, the two extreme colours of the spectrum, are fairly dangerous. So much so that I suspect they actually draw or focus the outside forces. Any action or meddling on the part of the experimentalist is tremendously enhanced in its effect if the action is taken within barriers composed of these colours, in certain proportions and tints. In the same way, blue is distinctly a general defence. Yellow appears to be neutral, and green a wonderful protection within limits. Orange, as far as I can tell, is slightly attractive, and indigo is dangerous by itself in a limited way, but in certain combinations with other colours it becomes a very powerful defence. I've not yet discovered a tenth of the possibilities of these circles of mine. It's a kind of colour organ upon which I seem to play a tune of colour combinations that can be either safe or infernal in its effects. You know, I have a keyboard with a separate switch to each of the colour circles. Well, you fellows will understand now what I felt when I saw the curious appearance of the flaw in the middle of the defence. It looked exactly as if a circular shadow lay, not just on the floor, but a few inches above it. The shadow seemed to deepen and blacken at the centre even while I watched it. It appeared to be spreading from the centre outwardly, and all the time it grew darker. I was watchful and not a little puzzled, for the combination of lights that I had switched on approximated a moderately safe general defence. Joey would like to come in. We are not defended against cat. We are all powerless to the cat. Right, where was I? I was there. I was watchful and not a little puzzled, for the combination of lights that I had switched on approximated a moderately safe general defence. Understand, I had no intention of making a focus until I had learnt more. In fact, I meant that first investigation not to go beyond a tentative inquiry into the kind of thing I had got to deal with. I knelt down quickly and felt the floor with the palm of my hand, but it was quite normal to the feel, and that reassured me that there was no satiety mischief abroad. For that is a form of danger which can involve and make use of the very material of the defence itself. It can materialise out of everything except fire. As I knelt there, I realised all at once that the legs of the table on which Baines lay were partly hidden in the ever-blackening shadow, and my hands seemed to grow vague as I felt at the floor. I got up and stood away a couple of feet so as to see the phenomenon from a little distance. It struck me then that there was something different about the table itself. It seemed unaccountably lower. It's the shadow hiding the legs, I thought to myself. This promises to be interesting, but I'd better not let things go too far. I called out to Baines to stop thinking so hard. "Stop concentrating for a bit," I said, but he never answered, and it occurred to me suddenly that the table appeared to be still lower. "Baines!" I shouted. "Stop thinking a moment." Then in a flash I realised it. "Wake up, man! Wake up!" I cried. He'd fallen over asleep, the very last thing he should have done, for it increased the danger twofold. No wonder I had been getting such good results. The poor beggar was worn out with his sleepless nights. He neither moved nor spoke as I strode across to him. Excuse me. I am being attacked by my own body this evening. "Wake up!" I shouted again, shaking him by the shoulder. My voice echoed uncomfortably round the big, empty room, and Baines lay like a dead man. As I shook him again, I noticed that I appeared to be standing up to my knees in the circular shadow. It looked like the mouth of a pit. My legs, from the knees downwards, were vague. The floor under my feet felt solid and firm when I stamped on it, but all the same I had a feeling that things were going a bit too far, so striding across to the switchboard I switched on the full defence. Stepping back quickly to the table, I had a horrible and sickening shock. The table had sunk quite unmistakably. Its top was within a couple of feet of the floor, and the legs had that foreshortened appearance that one sees when a stick is thrust into water. They looked vague and shadowy in the peculiar circle of dark shadows which had such an extraordinary resemblance to the black mouth of a pit. I could see only the top of the table plainly, with Baines lying motionless on it, and the whole thing was going down as I stared into that black circle. Part 3. There was not a moment to lose, and like a flash I caught Baines round his neck and body and lifted him clean up into my arms off the table. And as I lifted him, he grunted like a great swine in my ear. The sound sent a thrill of horrible funk through me. It was just as though I held a hog in my arms instead of a human. I nearly dropped him. Then I held his face to the light and stared down at him. His eyes were half opened, and he was looking at me apparently as if he saw me perfectly. Then he grunted again. I could feel his small body quiver with the sound. I called out to him. "Baines," I said, "can you hear me?" His eyes still gazed at me, and then as we looked at each other he grunted like a swine again. I let go one hand and hit him across the cheek, a stinging slap. "Wake up, Baines!" I shouted. "Wake up!" But I might have hit a corpse. He just stared up at me, and suddenly I bent lower and looked into his eyes more closely. I never saw such a fixed, intelligent, mad horror as I saw there. It knocked out all my sudden disgust. Can you understand? I glanced round quickly at the table. It stood there at its normal height, and indeed it was in every way normal. The curious shadow that had somehow suggested to me the black mouth of the pit had vanished. I felt relieved, for it seemed to me that I had entirely broken up any possibility of a partial focus by means of the full defence which I had switched on. I laid Baines on the floor and stood up to look round and consider what was best to do. I dared not step outside of the barriers until any dangerous tensions there might be in the room had been dissipated. Nor was it wise, even inside the full defence, to have him sleeping the kind of sleep he was in, not without certain preparations having been made first which I had not made. I can tell you, I felt beastly anxious. I glanced down at Baines and had a sudden fresh shock, for the peculiar circular shadow was forming all round him again, where he lay on the floor. His hands and face showed curiously vague and distorted, as they might have looked through a few inches of faintly stained water. But his eyes were somehow clear to see. They were staring up, mute and terrible, at me through that horrible darkening shadow. I stopped, and with one quick lift tore him up off the floor into my arms, and for the third time he grunted like a swine there in my arms. It was damnable. I stood up in the barrier, holding Baines, and looked about the room again, and then at the floor. The shadow was still thick round about my feet, and I stepped quickly across to the other side of the table. I stared at the shadow and saw that it had vanished. Then I glanced down at my feet, and had another shock, for the shadow was showing faintly again all round where I stood. I moved a pace and watched the shadow become invisible, and then, once more, like a slow stain, it began to grow about my feet. I moved again a pace and stared round the room, meditating a break for the door. And then, in that instant, I saw, and this would be certainly impossible, for there was something indefinite in the atmosphere of the room, something that moved, circling slowly about the barrier. I glanced down at my feet and saw that the shadow had grown thick about them. I stepped a pace to the right, and as it disappeared, I stared again round the big room, and somehow it seemed tremendously big and unfamiliar. I wonder whether you can understand. As I stared, I saw again the indefinite something that floated in the air of the room. I watched it steadily for maybe a minute. It went twice completely round the barrier at that time, and suddenly I saw it more distinctly. It looked like a small puff of black smoke. And then I had something else to think about, for all at once I was aware of an extraordinary feeling of vertigo, and in the same moment a sense of sinking. I was sinking bodily. I literally sickened as I glanced down, for I saw in that moment that I had gone down almost up to my thighs, into what appeared to be actually the shadowy but quite unmistakable mouth of a pit. Do you understand? I was sinking down into this thing with Baines in my arms. A feeling of furious anger came over me, and I swung my right boot forward with a fierce kick. I kicked nothing tangible, for I went clean through the side of the shadowy thing and fetched up against the table with a crash. I had come through something that made all my skin creep and tingle, an invisible, vague something which resembled an electric tension. I felt that if it had been stronger I might not have been able to charge through as I had. I wonder if I make it clear to you. I whirled round, but the beastly thing had gone, yet even as I stood there by the table the slow greying of a circular shadow began to form again about my feet. I stepped to the other side of the table and leaned against it for a moment, for I was shaking from head to foot with a feeling of extraordinary horror upon me that was in some way different from any kind of horror I have ever felt. It was as if I had in that one moment been near something no human has any right to be near, for his soul's sake. And abruptly I wondered whether I had not felt just one brief touch of the horror that the rigid Baines was even then enduring as I held him in my arms. Outside of the barrier there were now several of the curious little clouds. Each one looked exactly like a little puff of black smoke. They increased as I watched them, which I did for several minutes, but all the time as I watched I kept moving from one part to another of the defence, so as to prevent the shadow forming round my feet again. Presently I found that my constant changing of position had resolved into a slow, monotonous walk round and round inside the defence, and all the time I had to carry the unnaturally rigid body of poor Baines. It began to tire me, for though he was small, his rigidity made him dreadfully awkward and tiring to hold, as you can understand. Yet I could not think what else to do, for I had stopped shaking him or trying to wake him for the simple reason that he was as wide awake as I was mentally, though but physically inanimate through one of those partial spiritual disassociations which he had tried to explain to me. Now, I had previously switched out the red, orange, yellow and green circles and had on the full defence of the blue end of the spectrum. I knew that one of the repelling vibrations of each of the three colours, blue, indigo and violet, were beating out protectingly into space, yet they were proving insufficient, and I was in the position of having either to take some desperate action to stimulate Baines to an even greater effort of will than I judged him to be making, or else to risk experimenting with fresh combinations of the defensive colours. You see, as things were at that moment, the danger was increasing steadily. For plainly, from the appearance of the air of the room outside the barrier, there were some mighty dangerous tensions generating, while inside the danger was also increasing, the steady recurrence of the shadow proving that the defence was insufficient. In short, I feared that Baines, in his peculiar condition, was literally a doorway into the defence, and unless I could wake him or find out the correct combinations of circles necessary to set up stronger repelling vibrations against that particular danger, there were very ugly possibilities ahead. I felt I had been increasingly rash not to have foreseen the possibility of Baines falling asleep under the hypnotic effects of deliberately paralleling the associations of sleep. Unless I could increase the repulsion of the barriers or wake him, there was every likelihood of having to choose between a rush for the door, which the condition of the atmosphere outside the barrier showed to be practically impossible, or of throwing him outside the barrier, which, of course, was equally not possible. All this time I was walking round and round inside the barrier, when suddenly I saw a new development of the danger which threatened us. Right in the centre of the defence, the shadow had formed into an intensely black circle, about a foot wide. This increased as I looked at it. It was horrible to see it grow. It crept out in an ever-widening circle till it was quite a yard across. Quickly I put Baines on the floor. A tremendous attempt was evidently going to be made by some outside force to enter the defence, and it was up to me to make a final effort to help Baines to wake up. I took out my lancet and pushed up his left coat sleeve. What I was going to do was a terrible risk, I knew, for there is no doubt that in some extraordinary fashion blood attracts. The Sigsand mentioned it particularly in one passage which runs something like this. In blood there is the voice which calleth through all space. The monsters in the deep hear, and hearing they lust. Likewise hath it a great power to reclaim backward the soul that doth wander foolish adrift from the body, in which it doth have natural abiding. But woe unto him that doth spill the blood in the deadly hour, for there will be surely monsters that hear the blood cry. That risk I had to run. I knew that the blood would call to the outer forces, but equally I knew that it should call even more loudly to that portion of Baines' essence that was adrift from him down in those depths. Before lancing him, I glanced at the shadow. It had spread out until the nearest edge was not more than 2 feet away from Baines' right shoulder, and the edge was creeping nearer like the blackening edge of burning paper, even while I stared. The whole thing had a less shadowy, less ghostly appearance than at any time before, and it looked simply and literally like the black mouth of a pit. "Now, Baines," I said, "put yourself together, man. Wake up!" And at the same time as I spoke to him, I used my lancet quickly but superficially. I watched the little red spot of blood well up, then trickle round his wrist and fall to the floor of the defence. And in the moment that it fell, the thing that I had feared happened. There was a sound like a low peal of thunder in the room, and curious deadly-looking flashes of light rippled here and there along the floor outside the barrier. Once more I called to him, trying to speak firmly and steadily, as I saw the horrible shadowy circle had spread across every inch of the floor space of the centre of the defence, making it appear as if both Baines and I were suspended above an unutterable black void, the black void that stared up at me out of the throat of that shadowy pit. And yet, all the time I could feel the floor solid under my knees as I knelt beside Baines, holding his wrist. "Baines!" I called once more, trying not to shout madly at him. "Baines, wake up! Wake up, man, wake up!" But he never moved, only stared up at me with eyes of quiet horror that seemed to be looking at me out of some dreadful eternity. And that is where we shall take a break. If you would like to know the conclusion part of this story, sure, that's a word now. Let's just go all Dickens on it. That's a word. Then come back in about 5 minutes or so. You know what to do. Cycle those fluids, stretch the limbs you got, and we'll see you back here in a bit. Thank you, and bye for now. Typical. As I've just said in chat, like, just now, because, I don't know, perhaps you, like me, are unable to stop trying to solve a problem, even when it's well past useful. That is true, I will have it ready for next time, yes. I kind of want to share it, because I know that there will be a much more practical way to do it. This is full on, like, me duct tape and optimism, deeply clunky engineering. Basically, the way that it works at the moment is the timer is just a text field and a snaz countdown at the bottom. I'm just going to do this while people filter back in from the break if you want. It's just a text field and a countdown run through snaz. I don't know if there's a better way to do a countdown, but that's what we use. And behind it, underneath it, is just a slideshow going through a GIF of the radio, which is our traditional break animation. And then it swaps that out with the other image in the slideshow, which is the schedule for the week. And we, like, when we were making the schedule, we didn't factor in a space for the timer to be shown, so it just sort of sits there over the top, and it's fine, it works. But ideally, you know, the thing to do is you have the radio with the timer, and then you have the schedule show over the top and cover up the timer, so you just kind of rotate more cleanly between the two, and nothing's like showing over the top, that just sort of untidying up the image. And I've realised actually what I needed to do, what I could have done, was just put a blank image into the slideshow, and then had the slideshow over the top of everything, so that when, in terms of the layering of the sources, so that when the GIF is on top, so when the GIF is showing, it covers up everything. So when the schedule is showing, it covers up everything, including the timer, and when it's not showing, it just disappears, and it's just a transparent image or an empty image or whatever, and you see the thing behind. I didn't think of that until just now. So now we all get to know, and if you already knew how to do that, cool. And if you didn't, we've all learned together. So yeah, I'm going to take that as a win. I thought of a thing that I'm sure other people have already thought and figured out. From the I in chat from Stephen, you already knew this, didn't you? But I never asked. So like, it's such a small problem. I'm not going to go seeking out people and go, hey, how do you do this? Because you know, you can just clunk it together. But yeah, good job, team. Well done, everybody. We've accomplished something today. Good grief, Perula, what is that? Oh, it's a breed, right? Okay, wonderful. Lynn, book week will just have to be extended for a week. Yes. It may get a bit sparse next week, though. That exactly looks like a very happy sheep, or a very excited sheep. That fits the brief perfectly. Wonderful. But yes, I realised I forgot to, before the break, thank Llama Lupe for gifting that sub to Majestic Salad, who did go to bed. But thank you, Llama, very much for gifting that sub. That's very kind of you and much appreciated. We've had book week. What about second book week? I don't think we know about second book week. Second book week is something we can all look forward to next year, as you know, a late summer treat next August. I'm already kind of looking forward to it, and I know that at some point in the next couple of weeks I will start thinking, ooh, what about all these plans that we can start talking about and then forget about in time? But as I have literally already suggested one or two things Lucy's way, and I'm sure she's done a couple of things back to me. So yeah, we'll probably start, like, open up a document and start talking about things we'd like to do, so we can just like better prep for it next year. But yeah, I think I'm just organized. I have so much desk space now, and I'm still struggling to organize it such that I don't do what I just nearly did and knock a bottle of water over. It wouldn't be as bad as a pint glass, but it would still be kind of bad. So, good. You sit there and just obey some of the laws of physics that govern you standing there, and ignore the ones that say tip. Great. Right. We shall carry on. Oh, Thunder, yes, hello, welcome. I did see you sneak in there. I hope that you are well. How is everyone? Yeah, doing all right today, thank you. I'm enjoying the story. I hope everyone else is. Laws are meant to be broken? No, well, some, yes. I mean, that's a whole discussion. We don't have time to do both that and read, so you just get the story. But yeah, Thunder, good to see you. Please do not break the laws of physics. Okay, I'll try. No, you don't need to apologise. You're absolutely fine. I hope the tiding was successful. You were good? Good. I am glad. Yeah, no, you have not arrived late. You have arrived... Stephen, was it on your stream you were talking about this the other day? Or was it someone? I'm trying to think if it was you or Herb. The wizard arrives precisely when they mean to. And being like, hey, now hang on. How can wizards get a free pass and no one else does? But, yes, you are... Everybody is welcome to arrive precisely when they do. And, yeah. You can't unthink Hog-Eye Man when the guy made pig sounds. Yeah. There's a little bit of that. A slight kind of tinge of the absurd to this whole porcine misadventure. But, you know. The thunder arrives precisely when he means to. Exactly. Right. Let us carry on. I delivered that like it was a pun, but it's not. I'm just saying words. And we shall continue with The Hog by William Hope Hodgson. Part 4. By this time, the shadow had blackened all around us, and I felt that strangely terrible vertigo coming over me again. Jumping from my feet, I caught up Baines in my arms and stepped over the first of the protective circles, the violet, and stood between it and the indigo circle, holding Baines as close to me as possible so as to prevent any portion of his helpless body from protruding outside the indigo and blue circles. From the black, shadowy mouth which now filled the whole of the centre of the defence, there came a faint sound, not near, but seeming to come up at me out of unknown abysses. Very, very faint and lost it sounded, but I recognized it as unmistakably the infinitely remote murmur of countless swine. And that same moment Baines, as if answering the sound, grunted like a swine in my arms. There I stood between the glass vacuum tubes of the circles, gazing dizzily into that black shadowy pit mouth which seemed to drop sheer into hell from below my left elbow. Things had gone so utterly beyond all that I had thought of, and it had all somehow come about so gradually and yet so suddenly, that I was really a bit below my natural self. I felt mentally paralysed and could think of nothing except that not 20 feet away was the door and the outer natural world, and here I was face to face with some unthought of danger, and all adrift what to do to avoid it. You fellows will understand this better when I tell you that the bluish glare from the 3 circles showed me that there were now hundreds and hundreds of those small smoke-like puffs of black cloud circling round and round outside the barrier in an unvarying, unending procession. And all the time I was holding the rigid body of Baines in my arms, trying not to give way to the loathing that got me each time he grunted. Every 20 or 30 seconds he grunted, as if in answer to the sounds which were almost too faint for my normal hearing. I can tell you it was like holding something worse than a corpse in my arms, standing there balanced between physical death on one side and soul destruction on the other. Abruptly, from out of the deep that lay so close that my elbow and shoulder overhung it, There came a faint, marvellously faint murmur of swine, so utterly far away that the sound was as remote as a lost echo. Baines answered it with a pig-like squeal that set every fibre in me protesting in sheer human revolt, and I sweated coldly from head to foot. Pulling myself together, I tried to pierce down into the mouth of the great shadow when, for the second time, a low peal of thunder sounded in the room, and every joint in my body seemed to jolt and burn. In turning to look down the pit, I had allowed one of Baines' heels to protrude for a moment slightly beyond the blue circle, and a fraction of the tension outside of the barrier had evidently discharged through Baines and me. Had I been standing directly inside the defence, instead of being insulated from it by the violet circle, then no doubt things might have been much more serious. As it was, I had psychically that dreadful soiled feeling which the healthy human always experiences when he comes too closely in contact with certain outer monstrosities. Do you fellows remember how I had just the same feeling when the hand came too near me in the gateway case? The physical effects were sufficiently interesting to mention, for Baines' left boot had been ripped open, and the leg of his trousers was charred to the knee, while all around the leg were numbers of bluish marks in the form of irregular spirals. I stood there, holding Baines, and shaking from head to foot. My head ached, and each joint had a queer, numbish feeling, but my physical pains were nothing compared with my mental distress. I felt that we were done. I had no room to turn or move, for the space between the violet circle, which was the innermost, and the blue circle, which was the outermost of those in use, was 31 inches, including the 1 inch of the indigo circle. So you see, I was forced to stand there like an image, fearing each moment lest I should get another shock, and quite unable to think what to do. I dare say 5 minutes passed in this fashion. Baines had not grunted once since the tension caught him, and for this I was just simply thankful. Though at first, I must confess, I had feared for a moment that he was dead. No further sounds had come up out of the black mouth to my left, and I grew steady enough again to begin to look around me and think a bit. I leant again so as to look directly down into the shadowy pit. The edge of the circular mouth was now quite defined, and had a curious solid look, as if it were formed out of some substance like black glass. Below the edge, I could trace the appearance of solidity for a considerable distance, though in a vague sort of way. The centre of this extraordinary phenomenon was simple and unmitigated blackness, an utter, velvety blackness that seemed to soak the very light out of the room down into it. I could see nothing else, and if anything else came out of it except a complete silence, it was the atmosphere of frightening suggestion that was affecting me more and more every minute. I turned away slowly and carefully so as not to run any risks of allowing either Baines or myself to expose any part of us over the blue circle. Then I saw that things outside of the blue circle had developed considerably, for the odd black puffs of smoke-like cloud had increased enormously and blent into a great, gloomy, circular wall of tufted cloud, going round and round and round eternally, and hiding the rest of the room entirely from me. Perhaps a minute passed, while I stared at this thing, and then, the room was shaken slightly. This shaking lasted for 3 or 4 seconds and then passed, but it came again in about half a minute and was repeated from time to time. There was a queer oscillating quality in the shaking that made me think suddenly of the Jarvie haunting case. You remember it? There came again the shaking, and a ripple of deadly light seemed to play round the outside of the barrier, and then abruptly the room was full of a strange roaring, a brutish, enormous yelling, grunting storm of swine sounds. They fell away into a complete silence, and the rigid Baines grunted twice on my arms as if answering. Then the storm of swine noise came again, beating up in a gigantic riot of brute sound that roared through the room, piping, squealing, grunting and howling. And as it sank with a steady declination, there came a single gargantuan grunt out of some dreadful throat of monstrousness, and in one beat the crashing chorus of unknown millions of swine came thundering and raging through the room again. There was more in that sound than mere chaos. There was a mighty devilish rhythm to it. Suddenly it swept down again into a multitudinous swinish whispering and minor gruntings of unthinkable millions, and then with a rolling, deafening bellow of sound came the single vast grunt. And as if lifted upon it, the swine roar of the millions of the beasts beat up through the room again, and at every 7th second, as I knew well enough without the need of the watch on my wrist, came the single storm beat of the great grunt out of the throat of unknowable monstrosity. And in my arms, Baines, the human, grunted in time to the swine melody, a rigid grunting monster there in my 2 arms. I tell you, from head to foot I shook and sweated. I believe I prayed, but if I did, I don't know what I prayed. I have never before felt or endured just what I felt standing there in that 31-inch space, with that grunting thing in my arms, and the hell melody beating up out of the great deeps, and to my right tensions that would have torn me into a bundle of blazing tattered flesh if I had jumped out over the barriers. And then, with an effect like a clap of unexpected thunder, the vast storm of sound ceased, and the room was full of silence and an unimaginable horror. This silence continued. I want to say something which may sound a bit silly, but the silence seemed to trickle round the room. I don't know why I felt it like that, but my words give you just what it seemed to feel as I stood there holding the softly grunting body of Baines. The circular, gloomy wall of dense black cloud enclosed the barrier as completely as ever, and moved round and round and round with a slow, eternal movement. And at the back of that black wall of circling cloud, a dead silence went trickling round the room out of my sight. Do you understand at all? It seemed to me to show very clearly the state of almost insane mental and psychic tension I was enduring. The way in which my brain insisted that the silence was trickling round the room interests me enormously. For I was either in a state approximating a phase of madness, or else I was psychically tuned to some abnormal pitch of awareness and sensitiveness in which silence had ceased to be an abstract quality, and had become to me a definite, concrete element, much as, to use a stupidly crude illustration, the invisible moisture of the atmosphere becomes a visible and concrete element when it becomes deposited as water. I wonder whether this thought attracts you as it does me. And then, a slow awareness grew in me of some further horror to come. This sensation, or knowledge, or whatever it should be named, was so strong that I had a sudden feeling of suffocation. I felt that I could bear no more, and that if anything else happened, I should just pull out my revolver and shoot Baines through the head, and then myself, and so end the whole dreadful business. This feeling, however, soon passed, and I felt stronger and more ready to face things again. Also I had the first, though still indefinite, idea of a way in which to make things a bit safer, but I was too dazed to see how to help myself efficiently. And then a low, far-off whining stole up into the room, and I knew that the danger was coming. I leant slowly to my left, taking care not to let Baines' feet stick over the blue circle, and stared down into the blackness of the pit that dropped sheer into some unknown from under my left elbow. The whining died, but far down in the blackness there was something, just a remote, luminous spot. I stood in a grim silence for maybe 10 long minutes and looked down at the thing. It was increasing in size all the time, and had become much plainer to see, yet it was still lost in the far, tremendous deep. Then, as I stood and looked, the low, whining sound crept up to me again, and Baines, who had lain like a log in my arms all the time, answered it, with a long, animal-like whine that was somehow newly abominable. A very curious thing happened then, for all around the edge of the pit, that looked so peculiarly like black glass, there came a sudden luminous glowing. It came and went oddly, smouldering queerly round and round the edge in an opposite direction to the circling of the wall of black tufted cloud on the outside of the barrier. This peculiar glowing finally disappeared, and abruptly, out of the tremendous deep, I was conscious of a dreadful quality or atmosphere of monstrousness that was coming up out of the pit. If I said there had been a sudden waft of it, this would very well describe the actuality of it, but the spiritual sickness of distress that it caused me to feel, I am simply stumped to explain to you. It was something that made me feel I should be soiled to the very core of me if I did not beat it off from me with my will. I leant sharply away from the pit towards the outer of the burning circles. I meant to see that no part of my body should overhang the pit, whilst that disgusting power was beating up out of the unknown depths. And thus it was. Facing so rigidly away from the centre of the defence, I saw presently a fresh thing, for there was something, many things I began to think, on the other side of the gloomy wall that moved everlastingly around the outside of the barrier. The first thing I noticed was a queer disturbance of the ever-circling cloud wall. This disturbance was within 18 inches of the floor and directly before me. There was a curious puddling action in the misty wall, as if something were meddling with it. The area of this peculiar little disturbance could not have been more than a foot across, and it did not remain opposite to me, but was taken round by the circling of the wall. When it came past me again, I noticed that it was bulging slightly inwards towards me, and as it moved away from me once more, I saw another similar disturbance, and then a third and a fourth, all in different parts of the slowly whirling black wall, and all of them were no more than about 18 inches from the floor. When the first one came opposite me again, I saw that the slight bulge had grown into a very distinct protuberance towards me. All around the moving wall there had now come these curious swellings. They continued to reach inwards and to elongate, and all the time they kept in a constant movement. Suddenly one of them broke or opened at the apex, and there protruded through for an instant the tip of a pallid but unmistakable snout. It was gone at once, but I had seen the thing distinctly, and within a minute I saw another one poke suddenly through the wall to my right, and withdraw as quickly as I could, not look at the base of the strange black moving circle about the barrier, without seeing a swinish snout peep through momentarily in this place or that. I stared at these things in a very peculiar state of mind. There was so great a weight of the abnormal about me, before and behind and every way, that to a certain extent it bred in me a sort of antidote to fear. Can you understand? It produced in me a temporary dazedness in which things and the horror of things became less real. I stared at them as a child stares out from a fast train at a quickly passing night landscape, oddly hit by the furnaces of unknown industries. I want you to try to understand. In my arms Baines lay quiet and rigid, and my arms and back ached until I was one dull ache in all my body. But I was only partly conscious of this when I roused momentarily from my psychic to my physical awareness, to shift him to another position, less intolerable temporarily to my tired arms and back. There was suddenly a fresh thing, a low but enormous, solitary grunt came rolling, vast and brutal, into the room. It made the still body of Baines quiver against me, and he grunted thrice in return with the voice of a young pig. High up, in the moving wall of the barrier, I saw a fluffing out of the black tufted clouds, and a pig's hoof and leg, as far as the knuckle, came through and pawed a moment. This was about 9 or 10 feet above the floor. As it gradually disappeared, I heard a low grunting from the other side of the veil of clouds, which broke out suddenly into a diapason of brute sound. Grunting, squealing, and swine howling, all formed into a sound that was the essential melody of the brute. A grunting, squealing, howling roar that rose, roar by roar, howl by howl, and squeal by squeal, to a crescendo of horrors, the bestial growths, longings, zests, and acts of some grotto of hell. It is no use, I can't give it to you. I get done with the failure of my command over speech to tell you what that grunting, howling, roaring melody conveyed to me. It had in it something so inexplicably below the horizons of the soul in its monstrousness and fearfulness that the ordinary simple fear of death itself, with all its attendant agonies and terrors and sorrows, seemed like a thought of something peaceful and infinitely holy compared with the fear of those unknown elements in that dreadful roaring melody. And the sound was with me and inside the room, there, right in the room with me. Yet I seemed not to be aware of confining walls, but of echoing spaces of gargantuan corridors. Curious. I had in my mind those two words, gargantuan corridors. As the rolling chaos of swine melody beat itself away on every side, there came booming through it a single grunt, the single recurring grunt of the hog. For I knew now that I was actually and without any doubt hearing the beat of monstrosity, the hog. In the Sigsand, the thing is described something like this: the hog, which the Almighty alone hath power upon. If in sleep or in the hour of danger ye hear the voice of the hog, cease ye to meddle. For the hog doth be of the outer monstrous ones, nor shall any human come nigh him, nor continue meddling when ye hear his voice. For in the earlier life upon the world did the hog have power, and shall again in the end. And in that the hog had once a power upon the earth, so doth he crave sore to come again. And the dreadful shall be the harm to the soul, if ye continue to meddle, and to let the beast come nigh. And I say unto all, if ye have brought this dire danger upon ye, have memory of the cross, for of all sign hath the hog a horror. There's a lot more, but I can't remember it all, and that is about the substance of it. There I was holding Baines, who was all the time howling that dreadful grunt out with the voice of a swine. I wonder I didn't go mad. It was, I believe, the antidote of dazedness produced by the strain which helped me through each moment. A minute later, or perhaps 5 minutes, I had a sudden new sensation, like a warning cutting through my dulled feelings. I turned my head, but there was nothing behind me, and bending over to my left, I seemed to be looking down into that black depth which fell away sheer under my left elbow. At that moment the roaring bellow of swine noise ceased, and I seemed to be staring down into miles of black aether, at something that hung there, a pallid face floating far down and remote, a great swine face. And as I gazed, I saw it grow bigger. A seemingly motionless, pallid swine face rising upward out of the depth, and suddenly I realized that I was actually looking at the hog. Part 5. For perhaps a full minute I stared down through the darkness at the thing swimming like some far-off, dead-white planet in the stupendous void. And then I simply woke up, bang, as you might say, to the possession of my faculties. For, Just a certain over-degree of strain had brought about the dumbly helpful anesthesia of dazedness, so this sudden overwhelming supreme fact of horror produced, in turn, its reaction from inertness to action. I passed in one moment from listlessness to a fierce efficiency. I knew that I had, through some accident, penetrated beyond all previous bounds, and that I stood where no human soul had any right to be, and that in but a few of the puny minutes of Earth's time I might be dead. Whether Baines had passed beyond the lines of retraction or not, I could not tell. I put him down, carefully but quickly on his side, between the inner circles, that is, the violet circle and the indigo circle, where he lay grunting slowly. Feeling that the dreadful moment had come, I drew out my automatic. It seemed best to make sure of our end before that thing in the depth came any nearer, for once Baines, in his present condition, came within what I might term the inductive forces of the monster, he would cease to be human. There would happen, as in that case of Asta who stayed outside the pentacles in the Black Veil case, what can only be described as a pathological spiritual change, literally, in other words, soul destruction. And then something seemed to be telling me not to shoot. This sounds perhaps a bit superstitious, but I meant to kill Baines in that moment, and what stopped me was a distinct message from the outside. I tell you, it sent a great thrill of hope through me, for I knew that the forces which govern the spinning of the outer circle were intervening. But the very fact of the intervention proved to me afresh the enormous spiritual peril into which we had stumbled, for that inscrutable protective force only intervenes between the human soul and the outer monstrosities. The moment I received that message, I stood up like a flash and turned towards the pit, stepping over the violet circle slap into the mouth of darkness. I had to take the risk in order to get at the switchboard which lay on the glass shelf under the tabletop in the centre. I could not shake free from the horror of the idea that I might fall down through that awful blackness. The floor felt solid enough under me, but I seemed to be walking on nothing above a black void. Like an inverted starless night, with the face of the approaching hog rising up from far down under my feet, a silent, incredible thing out of the abyss, a pallid, floating swine face framed in enormous blackness. 2 quick, nervous strides took me to the table standing there in the centre with its glass legs apparently resting on nothing. I grabbed out the switchboard, sliding out the vulcanite plate which carried the switch control of the blue circle. The battery which fed this circle was the right-hand one of the row of 7, and each battery was marked with the letter of the circle painted on it, so that in an emergency I could select any particular battery in a moment. As I snatched up the B switch, I had a grim enough warning of the unknown dangers that I was risking in that short journey of 2 steps. For the dreadful sense of vertigo returned suddenly, and for one horrible moment I saw everything through a blurred medium, as if I were trying to look through water. Below me, far away down between my feet, I could see the hog, which, in some peculiar way, looked different, dearer and much nearer and enormous. I felt it had got nearer to me all in a moment, and suddenly I had the impression I was descending bodily. I had a sense of tremendous force being used to push me over the side of that pit, but with every shred of willpower I had in me, I hurled myself into the smoky appearance that hid everything, and reached the violet circle where Baines lay in front of me. Here I crouched down on my heels, and with my 2 arms out before me I slipped the nails of each forefinger under the vulcanite base of the blue circle, which I lifted very gently so that when the base was far enough from the floor I could push the tips of my fingers underneath. I took care to keep from reaching farther under than the inner edge of the glowing tube, which rested on the 2-inch broad foundation of vulcanite. Very slowly I stood upright, lifting the side of the blue circle with me. My feet were between the indigo and violet circles, and only the blue circle between me and sudden death, for if that had snapped with the unusual strain I was putting upon it by lifting it like that, I knew that I should in all probability go west pretty quickly. So you fellows can imagine what I felt like. I was conscious of a disagreeable faint prickling that was strongest in the tips of my fingers and wrists, and the blue circle seemed to vibrate strangely as if minute particles of something were impinging upon it in countless millions. Along the shining glass tubes for a couple of feet on each side of my hands, a queer haze of tiny sparks boiled and whirled in the form of an extraordinary halo. Stepping forward over the indigo circle, I pushed the blue circle out against the slowly moving wall of black cloud, causing a ripple of tiny, pale flashes to curl in over the circle. These flashes ran along the vacuum tube until they came to the place where the blue circle crossed the indigo, and there they flickered off into space with sharp cracks of sound. As I advanced slowly and carefully with the blue circle, a most extraordinary thing happened, for the moving wall of cloud gave from it in a great belly of shadows, and appeared to thin away from before it. Lowering my edge of the circle to the floor, I stepped over Baines, and right into the mouth of the pit, lifting the other side of the circle over the table. It creaked as if it were about to break in half as I lifted it, but eventually it came over safely. When I looked again into the depth of that shadow, I saw below me the dreadful pallid head of the hog floating in a circle of night. It struck me that it glowed very slightly, just a vague luminosity, and quite near comparatively. No one could have judged distances in that black void. Picking up the edge of the blue circle again, as I had done before, I took it out further till it was half clear of the indigo circle. Then I picked up Baines and carried him to that portion of the floor guarded by the part of the blue circle which was clear of the defence. Then I lifted the circle and started to move it forward as quickly as I dared, shivering each time the joints squeaked as the whole fabric of it groaned with the strain I was putting on it. All the time the moving wall of tufted clouds gave from the edge of the blue circle, bellying away from it in a marvellous fashion as if blown by an unheard wind. From time to time little flashes of light had begun to flick in over the blue circle, and I began to wonder whether it would be able to hold out the tension until I had dragged it clear of the defence. Once it was clear, I hoped the abnormal stress would cease from about us and concentrate chiefly around the defence again and the attractions of the negative tension. Just then I heard a sharp tap behind me, and the blue circle jarred somewhat, having now ridden completely over the violet and indigo circles and dropped clear onto the floor. The same instant there came a low, rolling noise as of thunder and a curious roaring. The black circling wall had thinned away from around us, and the room showed clearly once more, yet nothing was to be seen, except that now and then a peculiar bluish flicker of light would ripple across the floor. Turning to look at the defence, I noticed I was surrounded by the circling wall of black cloud, and looked strangely extraordinary seen from the outside. It resembled a slightly swaying, squat funnel of whirling black mist reaching from the floor to the ceiling, and through it I could see glowing, sometimes vague and sometimes plain, the indigo and violet circles. And then, as I watched, the whole room seemed suddenly filled with an awful presence which pressed upon me with a weight of horror that was the very essence of spiritual deathliness. Kneeling there, in the blue circle by Baines, my initiative faculties stupefied and temporarily paralyzed, I could form no further plan of escape, and indeed I seemed to care for nothing at the moment. I felt I had already escaped from immediate destruction, and I was strung up to an amazing pitch of indifference to any minor horrors. Baines all this while had been quietly lying on his side. I rolled him over and looked closely at his eyes, taking care on account of his condition not to gaze into them, for if he had passed beyond the line of retraction he would be dangerous. I mean, if the wandering part of his essence had been assimilated by the hog, then Baines would be spiritually accessible and might be even then no more than the outer form of the man, charged with radiation of the monstrous ego of the hog, and therefore capable of what I might term, for want of a more exact phrase, a psychically infective force, such force being more readily transmitted through the eyes than any other way, and capable of producing a brainstorm of an extremely dangerous character. I found Baines, however, with both eyes, with an extraordinary distressed, interned quality. Not the eyeballs, remember, but a reflex action transmitted from the mental eye to the physical eye, and giving to the physical eye an expression of thought instead of sight. I wonder whether I make this clear to you. Abruptly, from every part of the room there broke out the noise of those hoofs again, making the place echo with the sound as if 1,000 swine had started suddenly from an absolute immobility into a mad charge. The whole riot of animal sound seemed to heave itself in one wave towards the oddly swaying and circling funnel of black cloud which rose from floor to ceiling around the violet and indigo circles. As the sounds ceased, I saw something was rising up through the middle of the defence. It rose with a slow, steady movement. I saw it pale and huge through the swaying, whirling funnel of cloud, a monstrous, pallid snout rising out of that unknowable abyss. It rose higher like a huge pale mound. Through a thinning of the cloud curtain I saw one small eye. I shall never see a pig's eye again without feeling something of what I felt then. A pig's eye with a sort of hell light of vile understanding shining at the back of it. Part 6. And then, suddenly, a dreadful terror came over me, for I saw the beginning of the end that I had been dreading all along. I saw through the slow whirl of the cloud curtains and the violet circle had begun to leave the floor. It was being taken up on the spread of the vast snout. Straining my eyes to see through the swaying funnel of clouds, I saw that the violet circle had melted and was running down the pale sides of the snout in streams of violet-coloured fire. And as it melted, there came a change in the atmosphere of the room. The black funnel shone with a dull, gloomy red, and a heavy red glow filled the room. The change was such as one might experience if one had been looking through a protective glass at some light, and the glass had been suddenly removed. But there was a further change that I realized directly through my feelings. It was as if the horrible presence in the room had come closer to my own soul. I wonder if I am making it all clear to you. Before, it had oppressed me somewhat as a death on a very gloomy and dreary day beats down upon one's spirit. But now there was a savage menace, and the actual feeling of a foul thing close up against me. It was horrible, simply horrible. And then Baines moved. For the first time since he went to sleep, the rigidity went out of him, and rolling suddenly over onto his stomach, he fumbled up in a curious animal-like fashion onto his hands and feet. Then he charged straight across the blue circle towards the thing in the defence. With a shriek, I jumped to pull him back, but it was not my voice that stopped him. It was the blue circle. It made him give back from it as though some invisible hand had jerked him backwards. He threw up his head like a hog, squealing with the voice of a swine, and started off round the inside of the blue circle. Round and round it he went, twice attempting to bolt across it to the horror in that swaying funnel of cloud. Each time he was thrown back, and each time he squealed like a great swine, the sound echoing round the room in a horrible fashion as though they came from somewhere a long way off. By this time I was fairly sure that Baines had indeed passed the line of retraction, and the knowledge brought a fresh and more hopeless horror and pity to me, and a grimmer fear for myself. I knew that if it was so, it was not Baines I had with me in the circle, but a monster, and that for my own last chance of safety I should have to get him outside of the circle. He had ceased his tireless running round, and now lay on his side, grunting continually and softly, in a dismal kind of way. As the slowly whirling clouds thinned a little, I saw again that pallid face with some clearness. It was still rising, but slowly, very slowly, and again a hope grew in me that it might be checked by the defence. Quite plainly I saw that the horror was looking at Baines, and at that moment I saved my own life and soul by looking down. There, close to me on the floor, was the thing that looked like Baines, its hands stretched out to grip my ankles. Another second and I should have been tripped outwards. Do you realize what that would have meant? It was no time to hesitate. I simply jumped and came down, crash, with my knees on top of Baines. He lay quiet enough after a short struggle, but I took off my braces and lashed his hands up behind him, and I shivered with the very touch of him, as though I was touching something monstrous. By the time I had finished, I noticed that the reddish glow in the room had deepened quite considerably, and the whole room was darker. The destruction of the violet circle had reduced the light perceptibly, but the darkness that I am speaking of was something more than that. It seemed as if something had now come into the atmosphere of the room, a sort of gloom. And in spite of the shining of the blue circle and the indigo circle inside the funnel of cloud, there was now more red light than anything else. Opposite me, the huge cloud-shrouded monster in the indigo circle appeared to be motionless. I could see its outline vaguely all the time, and only when the cloud funnel thinned could I see it plainly. A vast, snouted mound, faintly and whitely luminous, one gargantuan side turned towards me, and near the base of the slope a minute slit out of which shone one whitish eye. Presently, through the thin, gloomy red vapour, I saw something that killed the hope in me, and gave me a horrible despair. For the indigo circle, the final barrier of defence, was being slowly lifted into the air. The hog had begun to rise higher. I could see its dreadful snout rising upwards out of the cloud. Slowly, very slowly, the snout rose up, and the indigo circle went up with it. In the dead stillness of that room I got a strange sense that all eternity was tense and utterly still, as if certain powers knew of this horror I had brought into the world. And then I had an awareness of something coming, something from far, far away. It was as if some hidden, unknown part of my brain knew it. Can you understand? There was something in the heights of space, a light that was coming near. I seemed to hear it coming. I could just see the body of Baines on the floor, huddled and shapeless and inert. Within the swaying veil of cloud, the monster showed as a vast, pale, faintly luminous mound, hugely snouted, an infernal hillock of monstrosity, pallid and deadly amid the redness that hung in the atmosphere of the room. Something told me that it was making a final effort against the help that was coming. I saw the indigo circle was now some inches from the floor, and every moment I expected to see it flash into streams of indigo fire running down the pale slopes of the snout. I could see the circle beginning to move upward at a perceptible speed. The monster was triumphing. Out in some realm of space, a low, continuous thunder sounded. The thing in the great heights was coming fast, but it could never come in time. The thunder grew from a low, far mutter into a deep, steady rolling of sound. It grew louder, and as it grew I saw the indigo circle, now shining through the red gloom of the room, was a whole foot off the floor. I thought I saw a faint splutter of indigo light. The final circle of the barrier was beginning to melt. That instant, the thunder of the thing in flight which my brain heard so plainly rose into a crashing, a world-shaking bellow of speed, making the room rock and vibrate to an immensity of sound. A strange flash of blue flame ripped open the funnel of cloud momentarily from top to base, and I saw for one brief instant the pallid monstrosity of the hog, stark and pale and dreadful. Then the sides of the funnel joined again, hiding the thing from me as the funnel became submerged quickly into a dome of silent blue light. God's own colour. All at once it seemed the cloud had gone, and from floor to ceiling of the room, in awful majesty like a living presence, there appeared that dome of blue fire banded with 3 rings of green light at equal distances. There was no sound or movement, not even a flicker, nor could I see anything in the light, for looking into it was like looking into the cold blue of the skies. But I felt sure that there had to come to our aid one of those inscrutable forces which govern the spinning of the outer circle, for the dome of blue light, banded with 3 green bands of silent fire, was the outward or visible sign of an enormous force, undoubtedly of a defensive nature. Through 10 minutes of absolute silence, I stood there in the blue circle watching the phenomenon. Minute by minute, I saw the heavy repellent red driven out of the room as the place lightened quite noticeably. And as it lightened, the body of Baines began to resolve out of a shapeless length of shadow, detail by detail, until I could see the braces with which I had lashed his wrists together. And as I looked at him, his body moved slightly, and in a weak but perfectly sane voice he said, "I've had it again. My God, I've had it again." I knelt down quickly by his... Oh, no, part 7, sorry. Wow, I snuck that one in at the top of the page. Part 7. I knelt down quickly by his side and loosened the braces from his wrists, helping him to turn over and sit up. He gripped my arm a little crazily with both hands. "I went to sleep after all," he said, "and I've been down there again. My God, it nearly had me. I was down in that awful place, and it seemed to be just round a great corner, and I was stopped from coming back. I seemed to have been fighting for ages and ages. I felt I was going mad. Mad! I've been nearly down into a hell. I could hear you calling down to me from some awful height. I could hear your voice echoing along yellow passages. They were yellow. I know they were, and I tried to come and I couldn't. Did you see me?" I asked him when he stopped, gasping. "No," he answered, leaning his head against my shoulder. "I tell you, it nearly got me that time. I shall never dare to go to sleep again as long as I live. Why didn't you wake me?" "I did," I told him. "I had you in my arms most of the time. You kept looking up into my eyes as if you knew I was there." "I know," he said. "I remember now, but you seemed to be up at the top of a frightful hole, miles and miles up from me, and those horrors were grunting and squealing and howling and trying to catch me and keep me down there. But I couldn't see anything, only the yellow walls of those passages. And all the time there was something round the corner." "Anyway, you're safe now," I told him, "and I'll guarantee you shall be safe in the future." The room had grown dark save for the light from the blue circle. The dome had disappeared, the whirling funnel of black cloud had gone, the hog had gone, and the light had died out of the indigo circle, and the atmosphere of the room was safe and normal again, as I proved by moving the switch, which was near me, so as to lessen the defensive power of the blue circle, and enable me to feel the outside tension. Then I turned to Baines. "Come along," I said. "We'll go and get something to eat and have a rest." But Baines was already sleeping like a tired child, his head pillowed on his hand. "Poor little devil," I said as I picked him up in my arms. "Poor little devil." I walked across to the main switchboard and threw over the current so as to throw the V protective pulse out of the 4 walls and the door. Then I carried Baines out into the sweet, wholesome normality of everything. It seemed wonderful coming out of that chamber of horrors, and it seemed wonderful still to see my bedroom door opposite wide open, with the bed looking so soft and white as usual, so ordinary and human. You chaps understand. I carried Baines into the room and put him on the couch, and then it was I realized how much I'd been up against, for when I was getting myself a drink I dropped the bottle and had to get another. After I had made Baines drink a glass, I laid him on the bed. "Now," I said, "look into my eyes fixedly. Do you hear me? You are going off to sleep safely and soundly, and if anything troubles you, obey me and wake up. Now, sleep. Sleep. Sleep." I swept my hands down over his eyes 6 times, and he fell over like a child. I knew that if the danger came again, he would obey my will and wake up. I intended to cure him, partly by hypnotic suggestion, partly by a certain electrical treatment which I am getting Dr. Whitten to give him. That night I slept on the couch, and when I went to look at Baines in the morning I found him still sleeping, so leaving him there I went into the test room to examine results. I found them very surprising. Inside the room I had a queer feeling, as you can imagine. It was extraordinary to stand there in that curious bluish light from the treated windows, and see the blue circle lying, still glowing where I had left it, and further on, the defence, lying circle within circle all out and in the centre of the glass-legged table, standing where a few hours before it had been submerged in the horrible monstrosity of the hog. I tell you, it all seemed like a wild and horrible dream as I stood there and looked. I have carried out some curious tests in there before now, as you know, but I've never come nearer to a catastrophe. I left the door open so as not to feel shut in, and then I walked over to the defence. I was intensely curious to see what had happened physically under the action of such a force as the hog. I found unmistakable signs that proved the thing had been indeed a Sai'ti manifestation, for there had been no psychic or physical illusion about the melting of the violet circle. There remained nothing of it except a ring of patches of melted glass. The gutter base had been fused entirely, but the floor and everything was intact. You see, the Sai'ti forms can often attack and destroy, or even make use of, the very defensive material used against them. Stepping over the outer circle and looking closely at the indigo circle, I saw that it was melted clean through in several places. Another fraction of time and the hog would have been free to expand as an invisible mist of horror and destruction into the atmosphere of the world. And then, in that very moment of time, salvation had come. I wonder if you can get my feelings as I stood there staring down at the destroyed barrier. Karnaki began to knock out his pipe, which is always a sign that he had ended his tale and is ready to answer any questions we may want to ask. Taylor was first in. "Why didn't you use the electric pentacle as well as your new spectrum circles?" he asked. "Because," replied Karnaki, "the pentacle is simply defensive, and I wish to have the power to make a focus during the early part of the experiment, and then, at the critical moment, to change the combination of the colours so as to have a defence against the results of the focus. You follow me? You see," he went on, seeing we hadn't grasped his meaning, "there can be no focus within a pentacle. It is just of a defensive nature. Even if I had switched the current out of the electric pentacle, I should still have to contend with the peculiar and undoubtedly defensive power that its form seems to exert, and this would have been sufficient to blur the focus. In this new research work I'm doing, I'm bound to use a focus, and so the pentacle is barred. But I'm not sure it matters. I'm convinced this new spectrum defense of mine will prove absolutely invulnerable when I've learnt how to use it. but it will take me some time. This last case has taught me something new. I had never thought of combining green with blue, but the 3 bands of green in the blue of that dome has set me thinking. If only I knew the right combinations. It's the combinations I've got to learn. You'll understand better the importance of these combinations when I remind you that green, by itself, is, in a very limited way, more deadly than red itself, and red is the danger colour of all. "Tell us, Kanaki," I said, "what is the hog? Can you? I mean, what kind of monstrosity is it? Did you really see it, or was it all some horrible, dangerous kind of dream? How did you know it was one of the outer monsters? And what is the difference between that sort of danger and the sort of thing you saw in the gateway of the monster case? And what—" "Steady," laughed Karnaki. "One at a time. I'll answer all your questions, but I don't think I'll take them quite in your order. For instance, speaking about actually seeing the hog, I might say that, speaking generally, things seen of a ghostly nature are not seen with the eyes. They are seen with the mental eye, which has this psychic quality, not always developed to a usable state, in addition to its normal duty of revealing to the brain what our physical eyes record. You will understand that when we see ghostly things, it is often the mental eye performing simultaneously the duty of revealing to the brain what the physical eye sees, as well as what it sees itself. The 2 sights, blending their function in such a fashion, gives us the impression that we are actually seeing through our physical eyes the whole of the sight that is being revealed to the brain. In this way, we get an impression of seeing with our physical eyes both the material and the immaterial parts of an abnormal scene, for each part being received and revealed to the brain by machinery suitable to the particular purpose appears to have equal value of reality, that is, it appears to be equally material. Do you follow me?" We nodded our assent, and Karnaki continued. In the same way, were anything to threaten our psychic body, we should have the impression, generally speaking, that it was our physical body that had been threatened, because our psychic sensations and impressions would be superimposed upon our physical, in the same way that our psychic and our physical sight are superimposed. Our sensations would blend in such a way that it would be impossible to differentiate between what we felt physically and what we felt psychically. To explain better what I mean, a man may seem to himself, in a ghostly adventure, to fall actually. That is, to be falling in a physical sense, but all the while it may be his psychic entity, or being, call it what you will, that is falling. But to his brain there is presented the sensation of falling altogether. Do you get me? At the same time, please remember that the danger is none the less because it is his psychic body that falls. I am referring to the sensation I had of falling during the time of stepping across the mouth of that pit. My physical body could walk over it easily and feel the floor solid under me, but my psychic body was in very real danger of falling. Indeed, I may be said to have literally carried my psychic body over, held within me by the pull of my life force. You see, to my psychic body the pit was as real and as actual as a coal pit would have been to my physical body. It was merely the pull of my life force which prevented my psychic body from falling out of me, rather like a plummet, down through the everlasting depths in the obedience to the giant pull of the monster. As you will remember, the pull of the hog was too great for my life force to withstand, and psychically I began to fall. Immediately on my brain was recorded a sensation identical with that which would have been recorded on it had my actual physical body been falling. It was a mad risk I took, but as you know I had to take it to get the switch and the battery. When I had that physical sense of falling and seemed to see the black misty sides of the pit all around me, it was my mental eye recording upon the brain what I was seeing. My psychic body had actually begun to fall and was really below the edge of the pit, but still in contact with me. In other words, my physical, magnetic, and psychic halos were still mingled. My physical body was still standing firmly upon the floor of the room, but if I had not but if I had not, each time by effort or will, forced my physical body across to the side, my psychic body would have fallen completely out of contact with me, and gone like some ghostly meteorite obedient to the pull of the hog. The curious sensation I had of forcing myself through an obstructing medium was not a physical sensation at all, as we understand the word, but rather the psychic sensation of forcing my entity to recross the gap that had already formed between my falling psychic body now below the edge of the pit and my physical body standing on the floor of the room. And that gap was full of a force that strove to prevent my body and soul from rejoining. It was a terrible experience. Do you remember how I could still see with my brain through the eyes of my psychic body, though it had already fallen some distance out of me? That is an extraordinary thing to remember. However, to get ahead, all ghostly phenomena are extremely diffuse in a normal state. They become actively physically dangerous in all cases where they are concentrated. The best offhand illustration I can think of is the all-familiar electricity, a force which, by the way, we are too prone to imagine we understand because we've named and harnessed it, to use a popular phrase. But we don't understand it at all. It is a complete, fundamental mystery. Well, electricity, when diffused, is an imagined and unpictured something, but when concentrated, it is sudden death. Have you got me in that? Take, for instance, that explanation as a very crude sort of illustration of what the hog is. The hog is one of those million-mile-long clouds of nebulosity lying in the outer circle. It is because of this that I term those clouds of force the outer monsters. What they are exactly is a tremendous question to answer. I sometimes wonder whether Hodgson there realizes just how impossible it is to answer some of his questions. And Carnacki laughed. But to make a brief attempt at it, there is around this planet, and presumably others, of course, circles of what I might call emanations. This is an extremely light gas, or shall I say ether. Poor ether, it's been hard worked in its time. Go back one moment to your school days and bear in mind that at one time the Earth was just a sphere of extremely hot gases. These gases condensed in the form of materials and other solid matters, but there are some that are not yet solidified. Air, for instance. Well, we have an Earth sphere of solid matter on which to stamp as solidly as we like, and round about that sphere there lies a ring of gases, the constituents of which enter largely into all life as we understand life, that is, air. But this is not the only circle of gas which is floating round us. There are, as I have been forced to conclude, larger and more attenuated gas belts lying zone on zone far up and around us. These compose what I have called the inner circles. They are surrounded in turn by a circle or belt of what I have called, for want of a better word, emanations. This circle, which I have named the outer circle, cannot lie less than 100,000 miles off the Earth, and has a thickness which I have presumed to be anything between 5 and 10 million miles. I believe, but I cannot prove, that it does not spin with the Earth, but in the opposite direction, for which a plausible cause might be found in the study of the theory upon which a certain electrical machine is constructed. I have reason to believe that the spinning of this, the outer circle, is disturbed from time to time through causes which are quite unknown to me, but which I believe are based in physical phenomena. Now, the outer circle is the psychic circle, yet it is also physical. To illustrate what I mean, I must again instance electricity, and say that, just as electricity discovered itself to us as something quite different from any of our previous conceptions of matter, so is the psychic or outer circle different from any of our previous conceptions of matter. Yet, it is none the less physical in its origin, and in the sense that electricity is physical. The outer, or psychic circle, is psychical in its constituents. Finally got one. Speaking pictorially, it is psychically to the inner circle what the inner circle is to the upper strata of the air, and what the air, as we know that intimate gas, is to the waters, and the waters to the solid world. You get my line of suggestion?" We all nodded, and Karnaki continued. "Well, now let me apply all this to what I'm leading up to. I suggest that these million-mile-long clouds of monstrosity which float in the psychic or outer circle are bred of the elements of that circle. They are tremendous psychic forces bred out of its elements, just as an octopus or shark is bred out of the sea, or a tiger or any other physical force is bred out of the elements of the earth and air surroundings. To go further, a physical man is composed entirely from the constituents of earth and air, by which terms I include sunlight and water and condiments. In other words, without earth and air he could not be. Or to put it another way, earth and air breed within themselves the materials of the body and the brain, and therefore, presumably, the machine of intelligence. Now, apply this line of thought to the psychic or outer circle, which, though so attenuated that I may crudely presume it to be approximate to our conception of aether, yet contains all the elements for the production of certain phases of force and intelligence. But these elements are in a form as little like matter as the emanations of scent are like the scent itself. Equally, the force and intelligence-producing capacity of the outer circle no more approximate to the life and intelligence-producing capacity of the earth and air than the results of the outer circle constituents resemble the results of earth and air. I wonder whether I make it clear. And so it seems to me. We have the conception of a huge psychic world bred out of the physical lying far outside of this world and completely encompassing it, except for the doorways about which I hope to tell you some other evening. This enormous psychic world of the outer circle breeds, if I may use the term, its own psychic forces and intelligences, monstrous and otherwise, just as this world produces its own physical forces and intelligences. Beings, animals, insects, etc., monstrous and otherwise. The monstrosities of the outer circle are malignant towards all that we consider most desirable, just in the same way a shark or a tiger may be considered malignant, in a physical way, to all that we consider desirable. They are predatory, as all positive force is predatory. They have desires regarding us which are incredibly more dreadful to our minds when comprehended than an intelligent sheep would consider our desires towards its own carcass. They plunder and destroy to satisfy lusts and hungers exactly as other forms of existence plunder and destroy to satisfy their lusts and hungers. And the desire of these monsters is chiefly, if not always, for the psychic entity of the human. But that's as much as I can tell you tonight. Some evening I want to tell you about the tremendous mystery of the psychic doorways. In the meantime, have I made things a bit clearer to you, Dodgson? Yes and no, I answered. You've been a brick to make the attempt, but there are still about 10,000 other things I want to know. Karnaki stood up. Out you go, he said, using the recognized formula in friendly fashion. Out you go, I want to sleep. And, shaking him by the hand, we strolled out onto the quiet embankment. The end. And thank you for listening to William Hope Hodgson's scientific psychic textbook, which he decided to include at the end of the story. Right? Like... That is like it's Lord of the Rings grade. You thought the story was done, but wait, we have about 30 pages of conclusion to come in a short story. Like, yeah, I like it a lot. I am glad that he had the lore clear enough in his mind to feel confident in just doing a massive info dump at the end to just kind of explain everything. I don't know if this is like the last of the Karnaki stories that he wrote or what, but it did kind of feel like he'd sort of gone, yeah, I've got a lot of lore and people are asking some questions, so I'm just gonna drop the textbook. This is every single thing that I have planned out in my notebook about how all this weird and wonderful stuff works. Don't worry, I'm making it up, but I'm not making it up. There is consistency. There are rules. There are beings. There are places where they reside and where they cannot, and I'm going to tell you them. In conclusion, nobody understands electricity. There's ghosts surrounding the earth, and Pratchett was right. The colours are magic. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Llama. We could have saved about half an hour of reading there, but yes. Thank you for the follows, people that are following. So long as you are following for legit reasons, and not because you are here to advertise Bitcoin or art services. If you're not doing those, we're all good. Thank you. Welcome. I hope you enjoy the channel. But yeah, that like. Also. Oh man, so many different things. I was trying to like dog ear some corners of pages to come back to. I caught myself with. It probably was noticeable. The monster was triumphing, and I said like the monster was triumphing, like triumphant. And I think I got away with it, but I did have to pause myself and stop and think, wait, what did I just say? And like reread it whilst trying to read on. Where were some other ones? There were a number of... Oh, there was one sentence where I just completely missed the full stop at the end and ran it on into the next sentence, and you probably heard me pause several seconds later as I was like, wait. Yeah, poke out suddenly through the wall to my right and withdraw as quickly. Yeah, I just kind of withdraw as quickly as I could not look at the base of the strange black movement, so I just ran it on into the next one. Yeah, a couple of bits like that, but we got through it. That was a marathon. That one. Sad French ears don't hear the difference. Melhi, I know I'm not going to try and speak French. Je suis désolé. I lied. And yeah, then you just get to because I saw the question earlier, like, is he actually going to explain what the hog is? And like, well, yeah. As the finger on the monkey's paw curls. Yes, you will get so much more explanation than you needed, and still yet unclear. Like, yeah. So here's exactly an excruciatingly like A-level science textbook grade painstaking description of of how this all works. Right, but what is it? Oh, it's some weird space beast. Next point. And like, yeah, okay, sure, weird spooky space pig that comes through a hole in the floor. But there's a lot of parts that I like there. I like the it's a psychic body attacking his physical body in a psychic way through the colours and I don't know vibes. Yes. It felt a little like in a history class in school, which you failed. You'll listen to all the words, but they don't stick. Yeah, exactly. Per the discussion that we were having earlier. It was like, you're saying a lot of things. I could, if tasked, define each of these words. I don't understand what you're saying. But I don't know. I like the way that where he's talking about this sort of physical mental separation, that what he was experiencing while this was going on was essentially like his physical body being present in the room, and then like the psychic body being pulled down into this hole, and through sheer force of will, because he's so cool, he managed to keep them together and like had these things become separate, and that's why he was like experiencing vertigo and seeing these holes and these things around him, because that's what his sort of mental presence was experiencing. I think that's cool. I like that, and I like that he has considered that beyond just going, this stuff's weird. And yes, I do love that his solution to the whole thing is the power of rainbows. Like that's how we do it. It's like, well, you could just use the electric pentacle, but that's really just a big shield. And what I'm looking to do is actually control, like focus and control these things. And some of them are defensive, some of them are, I guess, well, some of them keep things out, and some of them draw things in, and I'm trying to find different combinations of these things that have different effects. Like that feels like a sort of, a more scientific approach to things are weird and there's supernatural spooky beasts out there. Lovecraft levels of science is terrifying info dump there. I've only read a little bit of Lovecraft in the end. I don't really have to confess it. The man's attitudes discouraged me from reading further. I've enjoyed a few bits. But yeah, it's problematic as hell. You don't need to say it. But yeah, I can't say that's something I'm familiar with him doing. But so I can't like compare the two. But yeah, I don't know, because I know that I think he'd like cited Hodgson as an influence of his. I mean, I should read the introduction to this, because every one of these, it's impossible for any of these British Library Tales of the Weird books to get through an introduction without comparing the author to Lovecraft, either as influence of or influenced by, which is a little bit tiresome, frankly. Is how it is? Yup. Ain't that the truth? Also I saw everyone pick up on the condiments bit, which I don't know. I don't get it, but yeah, sure. Where was it? I need to find that line again. Nope, I cannot Google a textbook. So, yeah, just something about condiments. And also being unable to look at a pig's eye again without seeing hell. I think, really, that's true. Yeah, I realised, actually, what this sounds like halfway through. It's just playing Minecraft. Your man built a portal to the Nether, had a nap, angered the zombie pigmen, and so it goes. That's it. To go further, a physical man is composed entirely from the constituents of earth and air, by which term I include sunlight and water and condiments. Ah, thank you. Yes. Great. Really, you were going to say it and forgot? Right. Yeah, like, I figured someone else would also pick up on that, because it's like this is the Nether, this is Minecraft. What you are experiencing here is that. Cool. But yeah, I think we're done there. Job done. Story read, which brings us almost to the end, almost, but not entirely, but almost to the end of Book Week. When there were lots and lots of pig noise, you heard angry pigmen in your head. Yeah, like that. Yeah, I was having that realization of, oh, here we go. But yeah, that brings us to the end. And briefly skimming my follows list, I could send you over to Crittervision. Do you want to go see Crittervision, or Cat TV as it's also become known? You want the hog listen to the Minecraft music disc Pigstep? Oh, Pigstep's a banger. I hope so. Should we go over to Crittervision? I'll have a quick skim of the reading aloud. Wow, we are the top reading aloud channel. Good job, everybody. Thank you. Everyone else is... No. You're playing, like, video games. That's cheating. That's not reading aloud. Yeah, good job. Yeah, I'm going to send you over to Crittervision, because that's a lovely channel and Joey loves watching it. Yeah, Joey's making me watch Crittervision. He is asleep on some boxes behind me. But before I send you all away to look at the burbs and squirrels mainly, do please, if you are free tomorrow afternoon our time, 3 p.m. BST, the best time, excuse me. If you are free then, do please come back to hear this very channel, where Lucy and I are hoping to read for you some plays-ish and poems. Not sure yet what plays we are planning to read, but I did find a bunch of, without saying more, scripts for a thing that I sent to Lucy yesterday with great excitement that we might do some of. I'm hoping, maybe, I don't know. And and some plays and things, and probably again quite a chill, informal way to see out the week. Because I'm sure that both our voices are getting a little bit ragged by this point. But yeah, do come back for that. It's gonna be fun, and as I say, sort of chill, informal, hanging out, reading stuff. it is shaking the magic 8 ball. Chances look good that I will try reading The Chaos again, as is my party piece. Nice that tomorrow's stream shouldn't collide too much with Dave's. Hey, happy days. Good. But yes, I shall send you now over to Cricket Vision. That's a reference that 3 people in chat will get. Yeah, let's go with 3 people. I can confidently say 3. If I have to be one of them, I will, but we'll see. And yeah, I will, and Lucy will see you here tomorrow. Thank you very much, exactly, to you. We will see you here tomorrow. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have enjoyed it, and for participating in Book Week. And yeah, we will see you tomorrow. Goodbye and good night.